All right, so for the next part of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is do a quick save just in case. And now let's go ahead and create the teeth of this worm, because this is another really cool tip that I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy. So let's go ahead and duplicate the current subtool. So duplicate that. I'm going to press S to go in solo mode. I'm not sure if this is the standard shortcut, but I just saved the S on my solo mode so that I can just press S and access it. I'm going to also go to the lowest subdivision level, right? And turn on polyframe just to show you. And what I want to do here is delete higher. So just like, let's delete higher now. And I'm just going to try to isolate the area where I want to have the teeth of the worm. So probably from here up to here. So let's go ahead and hold Control and Shift to isolate this bit. Let's go ahead and delete hidden. So we can go to the geometry palette. Sorry. So the geometry palette, modify topology, and delete hidden. I have a shortcut for delete hidden in my personal set of shortcuts. It's Control X. So I'll just be doing that the next time that I need to delete something. And maybe let's go ahead and run a zero mesher like this. So zero mesh, and I'm going to see what I'm going to get for this. So that's not too bad, but I want to have like a cleaner line in here. So I think the issue right now is that these sort of like spiky bits of the lips are creating confusion here for the zero mesher. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and also enable symmetry just to smooth this out. So I'm going to smooth this quite a bit. And let's do the same thing here at the top. Again, this doesn't really matter. We're not going to add details to it. All I want is to have like a cleaner topology so that we can add details. Let's try this one more time. With the zero mesher, there we go. So this is what I'm looking for. I'm going to click on half so that we can remeasure and go for half of these points, maybe once again. So we have something a little bit simpler and cleaner. And now I'm going to hold Control and Shift to access my selection brushes, and I'm going to select the Select Lasso. Now the Select Lasso in ZBrush allows you to select polyloops. So this is a really cool tip to isolate entire polyloops. So hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to isolate maybe from here. There we go. And maybe from here as well. All right, so now we have isolated those bits, and we can go to something like the polygroups and click on auto group. That way, if we go back to Control Shift and select the rectangular selection brush, let's bring back everything by Control click and drag in the canvas, or Control click on the canvas rather. I want to select just this bit and Control X. Remember, that is my shortcut to delete hidden. Otherwise, for you would be on the modify topology, delete hidden. So now we have this very simple mesh. Now, another thing that you can do to see kind of like the back of the normals is going to the bottom of the tool palette, display properties, and enable double. So that way you can see both sides. Perfect. So now if we get out of solo mode, you'll see we have pretty much, this geometry where we need to. Again, doesn't really matter that this doesn't match the worm. You'll see why in a second. But what I'm going to do is bring in the move brush, and I'm just going to push this forward a bit. Just so to follow those lips a little bit more, like those spikes. That's it. Doesn't have to be perfect, like I said. All right. So the idea with this simple geometry is that we're going to use this with NanoMesh to create those teeth. And it's kind of like a non-destructive workflow, or in other words, the kind of like particle system in a way from ZBrush. So now that we have the base, let's go ahead and create the teeth. And that's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to use a separate tool. So let's click on the tool palette. Let's click on the cylinder as well. There we go. And I'm going to click on Polymesh 3D. This is the same thing that we use for the worm. I'm going to scale it up. So you can make absolutely any object that you want in here. You want to make like a knife or a spike or whatever you want. That can be done at this point. But I'm just going to keep it simple, like these really thin and long hairs or teeth. So I think going to be a little bit larger than that. I'm going to click on the gear icon, and I'm going to use the taper deformer. So the taper allows you to create that sort of spike look. There we go. That's all I'm going to do. Then accept. And I'm going to use the zero mesher to simplify this even more. So I'm going to target maybe 1,000 polygons, so a number of 1, and remesh, and make sure that I have symmetry enabled. Let me just check. Symmetry, and zero mesh that. All right, so you see that's pretty simple. We can simplify even more. Click on have, zero mesh in that, maybe a couple more times. All right, so that's not too bad. All right, so we have a pretty simple spike, but I want to give it a bit of curvature. So if you look at my concept here, it's a little bit hard to see again, but each one of these spikes, that's pretty much what I'm creating here. It has a bit of a curvature so that that I can play around with the randomness a little bit, and with the sort of inclination as if the mouth is actually working and on opening and closing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the move tool here and click on the gizmo, and I'm going to select the bend arc. Now the bend arc is pretty cool. If you click on the green cone here, allows you to create an arc shape. So I'm going to do something like this, not too much, something like that, and click accept. So gear icon, accept. So now we have a pretty decent teeth, right? Now the next thing is to convert this into an IMM brush and then into a NanoMesh brush that we can use for the base mesh that we created. So that is pretty simple. I'm going to go from the top here. So just rotating the camera and holding the shift key just so that it snaps to the top. I'm going to go to the brush palette and let's click on this art just to clean this up a little bit. And I'm going to go to create and I'm going to click on create insert mesh. Now you have this button here. So if you click on this NanoMesh brush, it will tell you need to create an insert brush before you create the NanoMesh. So that's why you can go to the brush palette, click on create insert mesh, and then it asks you if you want to append it to the current brush. I want to create a new one. So let's click on new. And now we have this that we can just sort of click and drag and create a bunch of this. So you can do this manually if you have the time, but the trick that I'm going to share with you is to automate all of this. So let's click on the brush palette again, and now we're going to turn this IMM brush into a NanoMesh brush. All right, so now the icon changes to this sort of like cube, indicating that this is a NanoMesh. All right, so let's go back to our working file or to the worm. Make sure that you have the base mesh selected, the one that we just cleaned. I'm going to go into solo mode, and I'm going to hover over any of these. Actually, let's turn off symmetry. And I'm going to hover over any of the polygons here, press the spacebar or right click, and you see it says in the actions, insert NanoMesh, but in the target is only a single poly. So I'm going to change this to be polygroup all. So that basically tells ZBrush that we're going to apply one of those teeth to, every single polygon that has the same polygroup or the same color. So now I can click and drag, and now we have those hairs or those teeth happening everywhere in this mesh. So this is pretty much what I need. All right, so all we have to do now is play around with the settings of the NanoMesh to create the placement of the teeth. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up the NanoMesh palette. Where are we? Click here, NanoMesh. There we go. So you'll notice that the teeth are kind of like being dragged from the center, so we can offset them. You have these offset sliders here. So I believe it would be offset in the Z-axis. Let's see. You can play around with this. There's not, if you don't know exactly what it is, just start moving everything and see what it does. But yeah, it's the Z-axis. I'm going to push it forward. There we go. So it's just kind of like growing properly. All right. The other thing is that some of them are kind of like curving to the right. The other ones are to the left and that sort of thing. So I'm going to make sure that the alignment is set to the normals of the polygons. So let's click on alignment, click on align to normal, and that should fix it. There we go. All right. So now the next thing I want to do is play around with the rotation. So I'm going to use these rotation sliders. So the rotation in the Z-axis, that's the main one. And I want to make sure that I get right, maybe from the front. Something like this. And you can also use these sliders on the right-hand side that correspond to each one of the sliders on the left to variate it. So in other words, this slider with the Z rotation, what I just did, can be variated. So I can just add a bit of randomness to it, just a tiny bit. We can also do a rotation in the Y-axis, just a tiny bit again. And a rotation in the X-axis as well, very, very tiny. And then add a bit of variation. So this is what gives us a little bit of randomness. I'll show you how you can create even more randomness than that. But that's the starting point, right? So now we have kind of like that idea. Now, if you want to make the teeth kind of like closer a little bit, which in this case, I think it would be a good idea, we can take the rotation in the X and the Y axis and play with that. So I'm going to push that like so. So you see, it's just kind of like closing or eating in a way. So that's good. That's just the rotation on the X axis. And you can just play with the Y axis, but I think this is enough. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is play with the randomness of the size. And that has to do with the width, length, and height. So the height just changes like how long those teeth are. So I'm going to leave it at 1.2 just to make it slightly bigger than normal. And then use the variation so that we can change the length quite a bit. All right, now you can also change the size of all of these teeth at once by using the size slider here. There we go. So that makes it pretty obvious. And that's pretty much it. The next thing I'm going to do is create this kind of like randomness so that it looks more natural. And to do that, we're going to change the random distribution. So I'm going to click on this random distribution, and you see with a very, very low number, it just randomly places one of those teeth there. But if we increase that number, it starts to sort of fill the entire object. All right, so that's pretty cool, and I think it's looking quite scary. Now, the other cool thing that you can do with this tool is that if you wanted to, you can click on Edit Mesh. If you edit mesh, you ultimately edit the original mesh or the original hair or teeth. I'm not going to do that because I kind of like it, but just so you know, the option is in there. You can edit it, and then it will be updated to all of these instances. But the one that I want to show you is that you can click on Show Placement to turn this off, and that basically hides that that base mesh. So if I bring in the rest by getting out of the solo mode, we now have the teeth of the worm as well. Now, the reason I did it with this technique with the NanoMesh is because I can bring in my Move Brush, enable my symmetry as well, right? And I can start actually manipulating the base mesh. So let's turn this on. And as I move this, you see that all the hairs are not distorted. I mean, they are distorted in a way that they follow the base mesh or the base geometry, but the consistency of the teeth, not the hairs, is still there. So I'm just going to push this in a little bit more into the mesh and then turn off the placement. That is basically it. And another reason I like to use this technique is because, again, it's non-destructive. So if at some point I want to, change the way that this worm looks, I can just go to the rotation and just open the mouth like so, right? And then close it. But, I think value of 37 in this case is quite good. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of setting up the worm. Now let's go ahead and create a couple of things to build the environment that we're going to use for the rest of the concept.